All right, it's time for us to enter our speaker portion of tonight's presentations. So again, we're going to start with Stephen Albarran from Confident Cannabis, and he's going to teach us a little bit about data trending. Then we'll invite Gary and Jennifer from the Green Heart Foundation to talk about the essentials of cannabis security. And then we'll round our bases tonight with Max Lameau, who did drive down from Portland tonight, to tell us about their company MJ Charts and talk a little bit about price indexing and market reports. So let's give Stephen a warm welcome to the Cannabis Science Pub stage.
Hi everyone, my name is Steve and I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Confident Cannabis. I'm really happy to be here because I love talking about some of the things we're doing and in particular how it pertains to Oregon. So today's talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do really fast, not meant to be salesy at all. Uh-oh, I messed something up. Hold on.
I'm really glad Stephen's here because I could not have done that. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, running software companies comes with perks. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about what we do, and then I'm going to dive into Oregon. So we're going to take a look at what the Oregon cannabis industry looks like from a lab data perspective. So looking at THC, CBD, microbials, pesticides, crisscrossing, it's going to be really fun. So we started this company almost 2 years ago with the mission to help bring transparency to legal cannabis. And really what that means is that there's a wealth of data that's being created by these labs that's really valuable for everybody to know, from manufacturers to dispensaries to consumers, to know what's being made, who's making it, and what it's made of. And so that's the data set that we're trying to capture and then give back to the community. Our software is free. Any lab in the country can use it. We're currently working with 21 labs in a number of different states. Oregon is currently our largest market in terms of number of labs, number of people using the platform, but we're also in California, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, Maine, and even Illinois. And so we have 3,000 producers, a little more than 3,000 producers on the platform. Those include growers, manufacturers, extractors, you name it. So just really quickly, the way our software works, you can log in, you can place an order for a lab test. When you get your test results back, you get a website like this. You also get printable reports. This is mobile friendly, so if you're walking around your garden, you get an email or a text message notification, your test results are done. You can pull it up, you can look at it. It's got a high-res image, so you can replace that image with whatever image you want. So you can use this as a marketing tool, so when you finish your harvest, you can email that around to your dispensary customers and brag about what you just harvested. It has all the regulatory requirements there, so pass, fail on microbials and pesticides and so on. And it has terpenes, and the icons update depending on what the primary terpenes are. So it's a nice little benefit to bud tenders so they can talk about it using that. There's a shareable link, so this is the coolest part, I think. You can get this link, and then you can put it in an email, you can put it on Facebook, you can send it around to anybody, and this is sort of a virtual trading card of your lab results, right? So every badge has a lab result attached to it, and this is your unique profile. Again, all this is free to use. Just test with one of our partner labs, and you get this for free. So this is an example of what it looks like on Facebook. So you just take the link, paste it in Facebook, you get the image, you got the strain name, your company name, the THC and CBD passed, tested by OG Analytical. And you also get labels. So printing labels is annoying. All that data is just right on there right away. And then finally, you can benchmark your quality to the average in the state. So here's a chart. It's a little bit small here, but basically it shows every strain across a number of different states. And so you can see what the average THC and CBD looks like for those strains. You can compare that against your current products. We're adding a ton of new features all the time. We're based in Palo Alto, California. We've got 12 full-time employees, and we're growing pretty fast. So sign up. So now I'm going to jump into the meat of the presentation, which is, what does Oregon look like from a lab data perspective? So a little bit about the data set I'm going to present. So it's Oregon only. This is only for flower samples, and we've got 6,500 samples in here, so it's a pretty deep data set. This is coming from 5 labs in Oregon. It's almost a year's worth of data. And again, all of these findings are preliminary and exploratory. It's not meant to be, writing white papers on it yet. Just kind of cool to look at. So here's a map of the zip codes of the people who are contributing to the data set. So it's a fairly broad coverage around the state. You can see a cluster up here around Portland. You see a cluster around Eugene, kind of Medford area, a little bit in Bend, and a little bit in Eastern Oregon. So this page, I promise this is the densest page in the whole presentation. Let me just break it down. So each one of these boxes is one of the labs using Confident Cannabis in Oregon right now. So unfortunately the projector's a little dim, it's hard to see, but essentially this is basically showing the THC distributions among the labs. So some labs might test a little bit higher, some might test a little bit lower, but in reality it's not as bad or corrupt as sometimes people think. There's sometimes a mistrust of labs in the cannabis industry, but our data is showing now more and more that labs are getting better and better. And so that's a really great sign. This lab A is 18% average, this one's 16%, this one's 19%. It's not a huge variation, and it's fairly, it's got the peak sort of in the middle right there. This page is an illustration of the proficiency test results that just occurred in Oregon. So a proficiency test is when a third-party company, in this case a company called Finova, sends a number of different labs a known quantity of THC and CBD and CBN and a number of different cannabinoids. And so the third party knows exactly how much is in that thing, and all the labs need to do their best to come up with what they think is the right number. And then they report that back, and then they're ranked. So this is all anonymized. So these are lab codes. I don't even know who these labs are, but we kind of identify the data. And the way to read this is if a lab hit at 100%, that means that they got the number right on the money. If they're below 100%, that means they were a little bit light on the number, and then these guys were pretty high on the number. So for the most part, everybody's fairly accurate, right, in terms of reporting the THC number. There are only these OP and Q guys out here on the right who are kind of all over the place. So this is delta 9 THC, that's THC acid, and here's CBD and CBDA. So again, fairly consistent across the labs, except for the two or three guys on the right, which to me is a great sign because we can start to trust the lab results in a much bigger way than we could have a couple years ago, especially in other states. Oregon by far has the best labs and best regulations, and I mean that. For instance, they have to be ISO certified. Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. I mean, I can go on and on about why the laws here in Oregon are well thought through when it comes to labs. And frankly, a lot of it has to do with Roger and Bethany and all the people here in the room that are writing those laws. Okay, so that's what the lab data looks like. They're good labs. Now, here's a distribution of THC to CBD. So THC on the y-axis, and then CBD on the x-axis. A lot of you guys probably thought this is what it would look like. So here's the data. So there's clearly two distinct clusters. There's a THC cluster, meaning strains that have high THC and low CBD, and then the opposite, a bunch of samples that have high CBD and low THC. But what was interesting to me is that there's a pretty clear divide in these two groups. I kind of thought in my head intuitively it would kind of be a little bit more continuous with a lot of 1-to-1s, 2-to-1s, but it's not very common, right? So for the purpose of this presentation, I'm just going to call it THC samples and CBD samples. So THC sample is a strain that's made for high THC for the most part. Now THC across the board, and again this is for all samples, is fairly normally distributed, which means that it's a bell curve shape. The average is around 18%. You've got a couple of low THC numbers because those are the high CBD samples, but for the most part it kind of looks like that. If you look at CBD, it looks like that, very different shape. A lot of samples have almost no CBD, but again, that's for all samples. But if you cut the data and you only look at CBD samples, remember that cluster on the bottom? You get a little normal distribution down here. Now, obviously, there are a lot fewer CBD samples. We've seen this, well, I'll get to that. This is a whole other slide. But yeah, so even on the CBD end, you do have this sort of middle of the road. So whereas the THC, the average roughly was 18%, for the CBD samples, the average is roughly 10 to 11%. So you can kind of keep that in your mind as you're getting your test results back. So not everything has to be over 20% THC, guys. If you get 19%, you're doing pretty good. So, you know, is it all about the THC? So is THC going up or down over time? Here's a rolling 30-day average of what THC looks like over the span of a year in Oregon, which I think is pretty interesting for a couple reasons. One, there's not a lot of seasonality. So I would have expected a little bit more seasonality with respect to outdoor harvests and things like that. It's not really very visible. Granted, the harvest season's like right here and right here, so maybe we'll see it, but they're fairly flat across this 19%-ish average. So this is basically showing the incidence of THC samples tested. So of all the samples that a lab tests, what's the proportion of those samples that are THC strains versus CBD strains? And this is showing a downward trend in THC strains, which means CBD strains are becoming more and more popular. About a year ago, I got up here and I said, I think if I were a grower, I would start to grow CBD and kind of 1-to-1, 2-to-1 kind of strains. I see a lot of growth in that market. And sure enough, clearly it wasn't because of the talk, but people started doing it. So kind of non-THC dominant strains are becoming more and more popular. That's what that chart shows you. So now let's look at microbials. So this is the incidence of microbials over time. So you can see it looks like there's a spike, looks like microbials incidence spiked, and then it kind of fell off a cliff. Now, this is a great example of regulations at work. So up until March, microbials were required to test. Then they're no longer required, which means that the incidence of microbials went down. So that's not entirely surprising, but if you look at the people who actually test for microbials, the number of tests went down as well, right? So people were testing because they had to before, now they no longer have to, so the number went down. But what's interesting is going back to the other slide, this is the incidence of microbials when they actually tested microbials, meaning that the failure rate actually went down. So those people who voluntarily tested on this side of the graph were generally cleaner than when people had to test before. So kind of begs the question, people who aren't choosing to test for microbials, for the most part, have a higher incidence of having microbials. So here's a map of all of the microbials across the state, and it's kind of hard to see the colors here. But red means higher incidence of microbials per zip code, green means lower incidence of microbials per zip code. This is all aggregated and anonymized based on zip codes. I wouldn't be able to look these people up if I wanted to. But this is Eugene. It's fairly green. Look at that. Eugene is fairly microbial free. It's a little reddish in southern Oregon. It's a little reddish around Portland. But yeah, it's pretty green in Eugene, which I think is kind of cool. So what about pesticides? So this chart is a little goofy, right? I mean, why would it go up and down and up and down? To me, this has a lot to do with the changing lists of pesticides. Again, regulations at work. So the OLCC and the OHA have been changing the specific kinds of pesticides people are allowed to use in the different limits over time. Roger knows this really well. It's constantly changing, and so we have to keep up with that. We have to change our reports and reflect all that. So the way that I would interpret this is, there's a pesticide that people tend to use. It becomes sort of taboo. They stop using it. They switch to a different one. The laws change. They start using it. It becomes taboo, so on. So this is just pesticides overall. It's not a specific kind of pesticide. But clearly, this trend is not sustainable, and I think that once these new rules take sort of formation and they stop changing so much, I think this number will go down. And so these are the people who test pesticides. So the overall pesticide testing has gone up. A lot of people test just for pesticides before they do their mandated testing because they want sort of a preview, especially when it comes to extractors, right? So if you're going to buy raw material, you want to make sure it's clean before you extract it, so you don't waste a bunch of time and money. So pesticide testing is going up. So here's another map of pesticides, red being fairly dirty, green being fairly clean. And there's really not a lot of red. Pesticides are a really big deal in a lot of other states. California, the incidence of pesticide is massive. Colorado, it's massive. Oregon, it's somewhat of a problem still, but it's not nearly the level of other states, which I think is great. So people have figured out good practices here and are growing fairly cleanly. So what we want to do, and so this is just sort of a taste of the kinds of things we're doing. We want to sort of be that resource that people can go to when buying wholesale cannabis, when buying recreational retail cannabis. You know, if you're a grower and you want to know what you should do now to, you know, get better test results later, it's not all about the THC, of course, but, you know, I'm talking about microbials and pesticides and all these different things. You can use our data for that. So we want to try to be the Carfax of cannabis. You wouldn't buy a car like this without looking at the Carfax report. So that's kind of what we want to do. And that's it. Any questions? Thank you.
I'll be coming around with the mic. I've got a question right here.
You said that you don't charge for any of this information. How do you make your living?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we offer optional services to our users. So our promise to labs is always to be free so long as they use the software. Growers and manufacturers can order tests for free. Obviously, they have to pay the lab for the service, and then they get their test results back for free. The things that growers and producers pay for are things like labels. So that's an optional service. Not everybody wants that. You can pay for that. Another example is if you want to integrate the lab data to your grow tracking software, or if you're a dispensary and you want to have a really nice sort of menu of your test results, you can integrate that data. That's a paid service. And then finally, where we're going, so I want to talk to the distribution company over here, is we want to help build an online wholesale marketplace. So when you get your test results back and it's a pass, you click a button, post to marketplace, goes online, and you click a button, you buy it, and then we dispatch third-party transportation companies in the local area to pick up and deliver, and everything just sort of works. But we're software only. We're not going to have trucks and warehouses, so we're looking for local partners for that.
Other questions for Stephen? Got one up front.
Yeah, I was just talking to the THC Foundation in Portland today, and they were talking about clean green syrup and the kind. And I was saying, well, we had a visitor last few months from Philomath, the Stellar Demeter Foundation certifying organization, and they represented that their organic certification is actually, quote unquote, superior to the others. And he said, some guy at the THC Foundation in Portland said, well, that may just be marketing their own stuff. And I wanted to know if there was any independent opinion you had about that.
So we haven't done an evaluation of clean green versus organic, but from what I understood from talking to the guys at Clean Green, they do have a higher standard, and there are a number of pesticides that are deemed to be organic under the definition of organic under the FDA that you know are still harmful. They're just because they're organic, meaning they come from natural sources, doesn't mean they're necessarily not bad for you. So they have a little bit of a higher standard in that respect, but otherwise I wouldn't be able to comment too much.
Other questions? All right. What you got, Mike?
Real quick, where are you based out of?
Palo Alto, California.
Awesome.
Thanks again for making the journey up here. Any
Thank you,
last
guys.
questions? All right.
Oh, sorry. I have a bunch of t-shirts over there I need to get rid of. I flew up this morning, don't want to take them back. They're free t-shirts, men's, women's, large, small, everything. So go grab t-shirts.
Free t-shirts for all. Ooh, I got people running. Thanks again, Stephen. Thank you so much for making the trip up.